Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Hi, friends. This is going to be part 2 of an ongoing conversation that myself and Dave are having regarding to the recently released autopsy reports on the Idaho 4. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, we were talking about in our first episode kind of the nature of, well, first off, just to revisit real quick, you and I were both, I think, expressing our shock over the fact that this document dump has taken place. And I don't know why we should be shocked, because it seems like every other week there's something else that trickles out now. And, the perpetrator in these murders is now serving time. But, we're coming up on a year,
right?
I guess now.
It was July 2nd.
Since that subject was sentenced. And there's been kind of a slow roll now.
It's July 2nd, Joe, a year ago. And what we wanted then was some kind of communication about why. Again, I'm not saying why from the standpoint of the personal standpoint. I mean, that's something that every family has to go through themselves. I'm talking about why was this event taking place? What was going on that brought it about? We always have to find blame, and it's not enough to just say this guy's a monster and he killed 4 innocent people at one night for no reason. Most of us believe there has to be a reason. There had to be something. And I don't know what that is, because, well, they never went through a trial. And the prosecution allowed him to do the minimum, in committing, in changing his plea to guilty. So now we're left with this autopsy report of all 4 individuals. And when we did the episode, we thought we were going to do all of them, at the same time and go through what each autopsy meant. And as we were doing it, and I want to point this out because Joseph Scott Morgan is a professor at Jacksonville State University, and this crime, this horrible event, impacted him personally because of the students involved. And I say that because when a lot of people cover a case when it comes to crime, sometimes it's their own prurient interest. Sometimes it's the gore. Joe and I come at it from a different angle. And as we approach the autopsy, we both have children. We both have children in this age group at the time this took place. We both have had children that have gone to college, and there are so many things involved that make this personal that we have not covered it as much as we would other cases. But now that we have the actual report, now this is the information that would have been testified to in court had there been a trial. So to give you information, I look around and see how others cover things. And I'm going to be honest with you, Joe does a better job at explaining these things than most. And so I'm thankful, Joe, that you're willing to do this. After we did Kaylee Gonclaves yesterday, hers was a different attack. According to the autopsy report, hers was worse than the other attacks that occurred that night, which I don't know if that means she was the original target, Joe, or not. We don't know because, well, it didn't go to trial and Kohberger wasn't forced to say anything. He probably would have lied anyway, so it might not have meant much.
Well, I don't know if he would have lied or not. I still to this day, and forgive me because my point of reference for allocution is always BTK.
Right.
And I have no doubt in my mind that he told the truth when he allocated there in that courthouse in Kansas.
Wow.
And he went into very specific detail. And you're talking about a guy that had perpetrated crimes over decades.
And got away with it.
He still remembered everything in vibrant detail and knew the names of the victims and went through one by one.
Hey,
and
without going too far afield, Joe, I've got to ask you about BTK and Catherine Ramsland.
Yeah.
She is the definitive author of books about BTK.
Mm-hmm.
She spent a lot of time with BTK, and then she became one of Kohberger's professors, correct?
Yeah, DeSales.
Yeah.
Not at Washington State.
Right.
So she's at the same institution that he was at as an undergraduate and a graduate student working on a master's degree. And of course, he went to Wazoo out there to get a PhD in criminology.
God,
And
I've always thought there had to be more.
Catherine's a behaviorist. Yeah. And so she was, and I got to tell you, as a fellow academic, there's part of me that felt sorry for her, you know, because you don't know who's in your class.
Right.
I mean, she has no way of knowing, and that's one of the things you think about. I mean, and it is thought about, faculty members, we'll even discuss these kinds of things every now and then,
Okay, wait a minute. Now that's news. I didn't know y'all would actually talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would. And when this case happened in particular, there were several of us that sat around, and we all come from various backgrounds and investigations, and I remember us having conversations about, how would we react to this specifically? Walk a mile in my shoes, which we can't in Catherine's shoes.
Right.
And, I take exception with anybody, that would cast aspersions on her.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't have any control as to, what type of human being is going to walk into her class. If you meet standards to get into the university and you pay your money, you can sit in the class, right? No one has that kind of predictor, and she's a behaviorist. And it was a heck of a tight spot for her to have been in reflectively. And, and I'm sure that, she might be able to address it at some point in time, but I'm going to leave that to her. All I can say is, I view her as a colleague. I've been on panels with her,
very smart
at conferences. Yeah, she's bright. I was with her. I was on a panel with her at Duquesne at the Wecht Institute. We were talking about serial homicides there, and then I've been with her at CrimeCon.
Right.
I actually gave an interview with her on News Nation a couple of years back. So down in Orlando, and so I mean, my heart goes out to her. I feel horrible, that she was drawn into this, but it's one of those bizarre coincidences,
right?
In these intersections, that you have in investigations and in life. But so for her, I think, and for all of us that are in academia, you don't know who's going to be in the class. A lot of people had made a lot of hay over this idea that, he's well studied, he's going to understand how to work a scene and all this stuff. No, he's not. He's majoring in criminology, which is a subdivision of sociology, study of criminal behavior and those sorts of things. That doesn't mean he's a forensic scientist. And, don't go about conflating criminology and criminalistics. They're two completely different things. And so I never held to that. But, going back to our victims here, with Kaylee, I think many people are drawn to this idea that she or Maddie were the target. And I don't know if either of them were. It seemed plausible that that area up there where they occupied, that space up there, would have been the area where this began. Okay, I'll put it to you that way, and trying to understand who occupied that space. Kaylee's injuries, they far surpassed any of these others that we're going to talk about, the other victims and their injuries. But what kind of measure are we?
Yeah.
How do you measure it far surpassed, Morgan? Because each individual, each victim in this case had ghastly injuries.
Yeah. Okay. But that's why in the last show, Joe, when you broke down, what transpired in that room with Kaylee Gonclaves, and the way that you went about that. It's why we ended up doing a second part, because we wanted to spend the appropriate amount of time on each one of the victims. We don't want to gloss over any of them. And so if you want to go back and listen to the previous show before you listen to this one, go for it. But the goal here is to cover these autopsy reports in a way that makes it understandable. It is not something that Joe and I want to do. It is not something that Joseph Scott Morgan set out to do. It's part and parcel of what we do in terms of body bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. So as we begin the second part, we covered what happened with Kaylee Gonclaves and her injuries. But in that room, Joe, with Kaylee was her best buddy, Maddie. Maddie Mogen was in the room as the attack happened, and she was attacked. And I have trouble in my mind, and this, I think a lot of people do. How was one person capable of inflicting so much damage to both of these young women in a very confined space in a very short window of time?
Yeah, and that's the trick, isn't it? Trying to understand that. And here's something I wanted to, kind of compare and contrast, if you will. When you look at, because these two young ladies had been seen out earlier that evening. You remember the infamous, food truck video and that sort of thing. And they'd been to various locations. We kind of felt as though, at least I did, when we're watching them, on that videography, their gait seemed a bit unsteady. I looked and I thought, well, probably, they've got something on board, more than likely alcohol. But just to give you a comparison, Kaylee had a blood alcohol level of 0.107. Okay. And this is one of the things that's actually revealed in the autopsy report. When you look at Maddie, and this is in the opinion section. Remember, we talked about the opinions. Well, Dr. Singh, who is the prosector, the forensic pathologist in this case, she made a particular point with Maddie's case. Maddie's blood alcohol was 0.282.
Wow.
Yeah, let that sink in. And I'd alluded to the idea, little Maddie, and she's little, she's a tiny thing. I don't think that she would have posed as much of a threat as Kaylee did, and particularly if she's in this kind of inebriated state. For those of you that do indulge in alcohol, and there are varying degrees of how you're going to respond to alcohol, and certainly much of it has to do with how much you take in and over what period of time you take alcohol in. How's it going to affect your motor skills? Are you capable of verbalizing things? All these sorts of things. This is a significant, she's at a significantly higher concentration of alcohol in her system than Kaylee was, that is, Maddie is. So even if she is being attacked, if she's got this level, blood alcohol level, we call it a BA, if she's got this level, I don't think that she would have been able to put up much of a fight, Dave, because it's a considerable amount of alcohol, particularly for someone, her size.
And, to make note here, the legal limit is 0.08 throughout most of the United States of America. And, once you start dealing with double and triple and beyond that legal limit, it just gives you a barometer. But again, remember now, we're talking about young college students in a college town going out with their college friends and doing college stuff and walking home at 2:00 in the morning. And not something I find foreign. It's certainly something that I did back in the day. Yeah. And so I don't find it striking or anything. I actually thought that both of these young girls stopping for food on the way home, and going to their room and just being young adults, young college people, I had plenty of those nights, And,
I think that many of us did. We live lived through it, and through the grace of God, I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah, buddy.
Because I did stupid things, when I was young. But
if I ever ran for office, Joe, my theme would be "Yes, I did." Okay, just saying.
Well, but in their case, they're being college students.
Yes.
Okay, and there's no need to cast aspersions upon them for being that thing that many of us were, during this period of time in our lives.
They were more responsible than me with the way they got home.
Oh yeah, by a long shot.
Yeah.
For me, I can speak to that, and they didn't take any unnecessary risk. They caught a ride home, and you reflect back to that period of time, and they were thinking about, who was this person, and it turned out to be much ado about nothing.
Right.
But, when we think about Maddie's injuries, it's important. And again, we're kind of comparing this to, to what Kaylee sustained. But with Maddie, she suffered 28 stab wounds, Dave.
Oh my God.
And these are all centered around her face and her neck. I think that there's a significance here. And if we had a behaviorist, we would let them speak to that. But when you have someone that takes a sharp instrument and they attack the face, okay, I think that the behavioral community, looks at that through a lens of their trying to rip apart that personage, because every morning, I got to stare at this. And I apologize for my fans out there that have to stare at this right now. But, when you get up in the morning and, you go and shave and you look in the mirror, this is how, it's how you identify. It's how everybody else identifies you. So when you see the injuries that Kaylee sustained and that Maddie sustained, these are horrific injuries. So we're talking about 28 stab wounds, and 13 of them are actually featured on her face and neck. And in any other circumstance, that would be so wildly over the top. But when you compare what happened to Kaylee in the bed immediately adjacent to her, people will look at it and say, well, she didn't get as injured as badly as Kaylee. She got injured significantly. Now, she's got other injuries as well.
Hey, Joe, can I ask you something about the injuries? Sure. Okay. In going over the autopsy report, it says Maddie Mogen's autopsy report reveals that she suffered stab and incise wounds of the scalp, face, neck, chest, and upper extremities.
Yeah.
Stab and incise.
Yeah.
What is the difference as it applies to the death of Madison Mogen?
Yeah, well, with the stab wounds, and I've touched on this before, but with the stab wounds, these are all sharp. They fall under the umbrella of sharp force injuries, okay? And there's generally three categories with sharp force that we talk about. We talk about stab wounds, we talk about incised wounds, and then we talk about puncture wounds, okay? Puncture wounds are a separate set. They generally deal with if you're thinking about a non-edged weapon, okay, just say a weapon that is created,
an ice pick,
or maybe a shiv that might be used in prison. I've had cases, homeless guys in Atlanta used to love to take bits of rebar and file down the point because it's steel. And, they would shiv people with that, on the street. They carry it as a defensive weapon, fashion a handle out of duct tape on one end, and they can stab like this. So those are impalements even. I've had a lot of impalements. Those are puncture wounds. And they might be big puncture wounds, but those are puncture wounds. So those three categories. What they're talking about here is that you've got stab wounds and incised wounds. And of course, stab wounds are deeper, right? And then incised wounds are more superficial, where the skin is kind of laid open, an incision, right? Or like our incisors in our teeth, they cut through things, hence the term incisor. So you think about this combination. So with Maddie, and I may have misspoken earlier, not all of her injuries are concentrated on the scalp and face and neck.
You articulated it properly. Yeah, you said the right thing. Yeah, you did. Yeah.
And with her, again, I'd mentioned in episode 1 about Maddie. They pay particular. Dr. Singh pays particular attention to the fact that Maddie's subclavian artery is clipped, which you combine a tremendous amount of alcohol on board, along with the blood loss that comes from a subclave insult, and your lights are going out really, really quick.
Oh wow!
You're going to have a very much lessened awareness, okay, of what's happening. I think that all of us, particularly as a parent, you're thinking about this child, enduring this, and you're hoping, that there was not much of an awareness, right?
Yeah.
But pain centers did fire, in spite of the fact that she was just absolutely butchered. Out of all 3 of the victims, there's one victim in particular that viewers point to as having put up a fight. And of course, that's Xana Kernodle. And I think that, based upon what I have seen Dave expressed in Dr. Singh's autopsy report, I think I'd have to concur with that assessment, because she's got what would be when compared to the others, the injuries of the others. Many of these insults that Xana sustained were not the same as the others.
Well, and the one thing we also have, Joe, is the description of what was taking place by Dylan Mortensen, because Dylan was the one who told police what she heard and what she thought was going on. And even though she got names confused, she was talking about, it appears that Xana Kernodle, we know that she ordered food and was eating it in that 4 a.m. time period, okay? She was eating her food, and she heard commotion upstairs. You remember, Maddie and Kaylee are on the 3rd floor. Directly below them, Xana and Ethan. And Xana is eating her food when a commotion starts upstairs. And even though at first they thought maybe it was just, playing with the dog, Xana thought it was something else, and she went up to find out. And I believe, based on what we know at this point, I believe Xana was headed up those stairs because she did shout, there's a man in here. Remember that?
Yeah, sure
and
do.
That was a warning that Dylan then shared with police later. So there was a warning shot from Xana that something was going on. And based on what you're about to hear, I believe that this autopsy report backs up what we have believed happened with regard to Xana, that she was going up those stairs to find out what was taking place, that it was out of the ordinary. And I believe she was chased back down the stairs by a surprised Bryan Kohberger. I don't think Kohberger thought that anybody else was awake. I think he thought, sneak in, do my thing, and leave. And boy, that sounded really flippant. I don't mean for it to sound that way. I'm just thinking.
No, but I think that's accurate, because that's the way many people have interpreted this.
Right.
The rear slider is open.
Yep.
If you're targeted, you're back in the bushes, you're watching lights, come on and go off. You can see through the window, and you take that as your cue. But there's certainly, in the perpetrator's mind, there's certainly an absence of situational awareness, because who did this wasn't counting on anybody else having an awareness. And Xana certainly did. I think that's played out in her reaction to this. But if I can say something real quick about Xana, you know how I talked about with Maddie, her BA was at 2.82, I think, if I remember correctly.
It was.
Xana's up there too. She's at 2.29. And I believe that both she and Ethan had been at a frat party, that evening.
Yeah.
Let's step back in time for a second. These kids they're headed toward Thanksgiving break. Okay. Like things are either, depending upon how you look at it from a university perspective, things are either ramping up or kind of slowing down a little bit at this point in time before you go into finals, which you would do, when you got back from Thanksgiving or approximating that period of time. It's been a long semester, and I remember this clear as a bell, Dave, thinking about these kids and how, by the time you hit Thanksgiving, with students, they've had enough of you. And trust me, as a professor, I have had enough of them. I want them to go home. I need a break, at that point in time. And
they were blowing off steam, man.
They were blowing off steam. Yeah. And I think and we also have to keep in mind that Moscow, Idaho, people talk about, well, you can hop over to Washington. Yeah, you can. And Wazoo is right there. But dude, if you're going to go home on a weekend, you better pack lunch because there ain't nowhere to go to. I mean, it is a regional university that is in isolation. It takes a while. It takes a while to get to Boise even. I mean, it's a poke, man. So most of these kids, they're not just going to hop in their car and just, I think I'll just run home, and spend the night at mom and dad's house, maybe Friday night, Saturday night, and zip on back on Sunday. It's not like that. It's a long ways away. So these kids are there. They're there for the long haul. They're looking forward to Thanksgiving break. So they're out at a party. It's not surprising that her BA would be at this level. Now, we'll tell you one of the things that is revealed in the autopsy report is there is a trace amount of amphetamine in her system. And this is not methamphetamine, okay? This is amphetamine.
Thank you for being clear on that, Joe.
Yeah.
Where could one find amphetamine that would show up in your system?
Oh, it's actually with Adderall. That's what I think. I think that, and, either she's been prescribed Adderall or it's being taken as a recreational drug. When you see Ethan's tox, also, which I'm going to talk about next, Ethan's got amphetamine on board as well.
Okay.
So in their trace amounts. So I don't know if both of them
had scripts for. What does trace mean? When you say trace amounts, what does that actually mean?
It's on the lower end, that if they had taken it, according to the findings, you're thinking, well, this has already begun or they're on the backside of this thing running through as far as being metabolized out of their system. Okay. Cause hers was like 12 nanograms per milliliter, which is a very small amount, when you compare it to other amounts, that I've seen in the past.
Right.
So I don't know if they're cycling out of it or, what the case might be or why they would have this in the first place. But those substances were alcohol and amphetamine were found in both of their systems. But when, you're trying to take the measure, and we've heard a lot of things about Xana and the dynamics of her injuries. I think probably one of the things that really stood out and has always stood out to me about these insults that she sustained are these wounds that she had sustained to the hand. Because she had an awareness. You had talked about the scenario where she had gone up staircase and then, is rushing back in the room. Dave, I think she grabbed this blade. And she grabbed this blade because in the autopsy description, and this had already been alluded to previously, but we can confirm this now per Dr. Singh's autopsy report. This injury went down to the bone. Okay, so you're talking about cutting through tendon. So in order to do this, you have to grasp the blade like this, and the blade is withdrawn, like you're taking it out of a sheath, like this. And as you do, it'll slice you. And I know what some of you are thinking, Morgan, could the knife have been that sharp? Yes, it could have. Kimmy bought me, when I was in the middle of covering this case, she ordered the same exact K-bar off of Amazon. Same one. Okay. And she said, here, I got you something. And because I was going on air and talking about it,
Right.
I was one of the first people to mention the sheath, if you recall that.
Yeah.
And that they would probably find that. And sure enough, they did. And Dave, when I took that weapon out of that box, and it came in a box that's about that size, I guess. Mm-hmm. Okay. I took the thing out. I could have shaved with it.
Wow.
Factory sharp. And if I remember correctly, this subject had also bought a knife sharpener too. At some point in time, he had acquired one. But just factory right out of the box. This thing was ready to do business, I can tell you. So if you're talking about grabbing this milled steel edge and it's withdrawn like that, yeah, it has the ability to cut down to the bone. And that's what we're seeing. You see these in knife attacks many times when individuals are kind of fending off any kind of attack. You'll see them on the leading edge of the arms as well. These kind of stab wounds where people, it's called in sword fighting, it's called you parry. So with parry means you block or defend. So with a knife like this, she was attempting to parry. Okay. So to like block, defend herself, and she grabbed this blade, I think. And the perpetrator, while wielding this blade, all right, is almost like a machine. Okay. Just slicing, cutting wildly, because this individual would see that Xana is a threat. Not a threat so much in sense that she's going to attack him, but a threat that she could identify him perhaps, or get an idea, or she's going to go out. If she escapes and gets out, she's going to be able to shout it from the rooftops.
Right.
The whole house has been murdered here. Yeah. Come help. And that reduces his ability to flee.
Well, one of the things in the report, Joe, and it says that Xana suffered stab wounds to the same areas as her boyfriend and roommates, including her scalp, face, neck, chest, abdomen, and back.
Yeah.
Now, when I was looking over this, her autopsy noted that she suffered, punctures to the outer table of her skull,
yeah,
along with perforations of her jugular vein, heart, lung, and pulmonary blood vessels. Hers is the only autopsy that notes some of her injuries appeared to be defensive wounds. So
yes. Yeah.
When you say that Kohberger was caught off guard,
yeah,
and she is the only person that can identify him and what he has just done, I think he kicked into overdrive. I think he got just boom, and I think those wounds in her back came from her trying to get away and him coming at her. And bless her heart, all I could think of is Xana and what she must have been going through.
Yeah. And
faced with the nightmare of all nightmares.
Yeah. And when you start talking about these injuries to her skull, puncture wounds, and we talked about punctures a second ago, and I think that some people might think, and there's another piece to Xana's I'll get to in a second, but you think about puncture wounds, you're talking about what they're referring to as the tip of the knife.
Yeah.
So she's actually being stabbed in the skull. And your skull can sustain quite a bit of trauma. Okay. It's made that way, particularly the top table and around this area, the frontal and certainly posterior, not so much the sides, but it takes quite a bit of energy in order to completely penetrate into the cranial vault. That's kind of interesting. But here's another thing, and this is Ann Taylor, who's the defense attorney, their team was going to allude to this idea, and Xana's kind of the one thing that stands out here, because when Dr. Singh went to interpret her injuries, those injuries of Xana, she stated that this could be serrations, like from a serrated blade as opposed to a smooth edge. There's a way to explain this, I believe. Most people think about these events that we talk about absent any kind of dynamicism. That is, that it's like going to the shooting range and shooting at paper targets.
Right.
You're really good at shooting at paper targets. How are you in an actual real world attack? Okay. Because these things don't happen in a vacuum, right? So we've already established that she's fighting for her life. So with serrated edges, that is, if you think about a steak knife, okay,
right,
which they're not like the teeth of a saw, where they kind of look like little mountain peaks, okay? Even though they do have little points on it, they're also scalloped, with these kind of, and it's a knife that you don't have to sharpen, right? Okay.
Right.
Because it's there. It's like you cut meat with it, like if you're at the dining table, that sort of thing. The reason I think that this injury that she's saying might have the appearance of being generated by a serrated edge is because the movement, the twisting, the turning, the pain response, all this sorts of thing. You can't take that one assessment and definitively say that there's more than one weapon at play here. And I'll stand by that. You can't do that.
And you're right, because her injuries are different because she is fighting back. She is fighting. Alert. Yeah. She is, whereas Maddie and Kaylee were both asleep or about to be asleep. And the attack on Xana could have begun on the stairs. We don't know, but we do know that there was movement, that she was fighting. She's got defensive wounds. You said she grabbed the knife, which just burns a hole in my heart for her. Yeah. Can you imagine what that's got to be like? And yet hers was different. So it makes sense. And again, there is no evidence pointing to anybody else being in the home at that time to do this damage.
Yeah, there's not. And, but to Xana, there was much damage done. Okay. She was just absolutely wrecked. I don't think that, but unlike Kaylee, Xana was never, that one of the things they've talked about with Kaylee is that she's it was almost like an entrapment for her on the end of that bed.
Right.
But with Xana, she's got a lot of space to move around in. Okay. This is not some kind of entrapment where she's pinned against a wall or something like this. It's very, very dynamic for her to be able to respond to the pain and to, kind of try to fend these things off. We've talked about Xana and her injuries. We've certainly talked about Kaylee and Maddie. And they, according to Dr. Singh, and this is coming from Dr. Singh, they experienced a lot of pain in these deaths, in their murders. But what Dr. Singh says about Ethan Chapin, is that out of all of the victims, the male in the house, he experienced the lowest amount of pain and the least amount of injuries. Yeah, Dave, we've talked about these three young ladies that have absolutely been butchered, and in no way am I trying to reduce or lessen the impact on Ethan because, again, when compared to any other kind of event, his would be so over the top. But when you compare it to the other ones, I think this is what Dr. Singh is doing because she's got a set here. She's got a set of 4, right?
Right.
And in her statement and what they are saying, or what the state is alleging in this release, they say, not Joe Scott Morgan, but they say that he would have suffered the least amount of pain, according to Dr. Singh. And this is what she would have, in fact, testified to, Dave.
Now, Joe, one of the things that happened right after the murders, if you remember, we had the coroner walking, what's her name? Maybe. Well, anyway, she walks through, and her report to the public, which was odd, was that all of the murders, that these young people were murdered while they were asleep in their beds. And that one of the things that stayed out in the public arena was that Ethan was only stabbed one time. And that was kind of interesting because we heard that. And then if you remember the leak that came out that one of the networks had a whole episode that they broke down the leak from the investigation. And it was how that some type of injury to Ethan was a sign or something. There was a design of it or something along those lines. And now that we have the actual autopsy report, what really happened with Ethan Chapin, Joe?
Yeah, isn't that something? There was, whoever this media outlet was, they really went far afield with this. They even used the term carved.
Right. And it led to an investigation that I think is still continuing right now.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how we haven't heard anything else about that?
I just hit me that I don't recall an update.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Absolute crickets. And I bet you dollars to donuts, we don't hear anything else about that. The leak that came from within. But that's old news at this point, for our purposes of what we're doing here, relative to these victims, of which Ethan is one. And certainly he sustained these ghastly injuries. I can tell you right now that, Ethan sustained more than one injury. And what they had alluded to, after the one injury thing came out about him, then it was the next thing about the carving. Well, no, it's not about that. It's not carving, that took place. He sustained both stab and incised injuries to his lower extremities. Now, we don't really know what that means. If you're looking for some kind of, cryptic message, which, it almost, that group of people that released that, it almost implied that. And it's very, very salacious. We
were trying to figure out what could have possibly been done to him that they are calling it a carving.
Yeah, no. And I have still to this day, but there's a lot of things, with these cases that we look back now retrospectively, and think, why in the world would you say this? Because it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But as far as Ethan is concerned, he apparently was in a pretty static position. He will, interestingly enough, I'd mentioned what his findings were regarding the amphetamine. Now, his is considerably higher, than Xana's. All right, like 260 nanograms per milliliter. But he had less alcohol on board. But he still, by most standards in most states, he's still legally inebriated. He was 0.122.
Yeah.
You look at Xana, hers is, almost twice that amount. So interesting little aside there. And again, I don't know if he was on prescription. And again, this is amphetamine, which would derive from Adderall, I think. I don't know if he was prescribed Adderall, perhaps. or if this is something that was, obtained in some other manner. It doesn't matter at this time because the injuries that he sustained give you an indication that he was probably in a static position when he was attacked. Static, probably on his back. He's got a number of stab wounds that involve, again, the scalp, the face, the neck. And do you see a theme developing here, Dave?
Yeah.
Every one of these victims has been attacked, the neck up, right?
Yeah.
And he's got 4, all right? 4, he's got a stab wound of his upper chest, all right, and a number of incised injuries, like we had mentioned, to the extremities, stab wound and incised wounds of the lower extremities, again, going to his legs. And then he's got in his neck, his jugular vein, and again, Dave, his subclavian vein and artery have both been perforated. Okay, we talked about the arteries earlier, but in this cluster of injuries he's got around his neck, these have been perforated. Okay, and the reason that's muy importante is that this amount of blood loss that you're going to sustain from these insults here, you're going to be pulling the shades on life pretty quickly, because and these are major areas that supply these structures in the neck and at the end, the brain, with blood. And so if that is blocked in any way, certainly with an insult or insults like this, it's really going to bring about death pretty quickly here, Dave.
Wow. All right. So with the release of these 4 autopsy reports, we find that Kaylee Gonclaves, her injuries were different and more severe than the others. She and Maddie were attacked simultaneously, almost. I mean, right there at the same time, with just brutality beyond anything. Xana probably heard what was going on upstairs, got up there to look, and probably was chased back down by Kohberger and attacked as she was trying to get to her room for some kind of safety. The brutality on hers is vicious and defensive wounds, including grabbing the knife with her bare hands.
Yes.
After she's dead, Ethan is then attacked, and as you mentioned, his are serious, deadly wounds that would have impacted him very quickly, and his was probably the last. And then Kohberger, now exhausted, leaves the house.
Yes. Yes,
and
that's accurate.
That's what would have been testified to in court at trial had it happened. And now that didn't happen, we finally have these reports, and it was a surprise. We didn't know this was coming.
No, we didn't. And into Dr. Singh's role in this, I've got to say, earlier on I'd mentioned how well done these reports are. I cannot, and look, they're available. I mean, anybody can see these. I was just telling Brother Dave just a moment ago, friends, that we could literally sit here. I think that we could have probably done about 5 episodes.
Yeah.
Merely based on these autopsy reports. But you can take time to read them. They're out there. They're all over the place now, at the time of this recording. But, as we kind of close the door on this chapter, I don't know if there are going to be any more releases that will happen. However, there's something I do want to close with, and I think that this is the most important thing of all, for me, at least right now. Brother Dave and I have just gotten back from CrimeCon, and I had one of these fortuitous meetings while I was headed back up to my room. Kimmy and I we were just absolutely exhausted, and there was a couple in the elevator with us, and they were talking about how just dead on their feet, tired they were. And I happened to look, you wear these badges at these things, and it will designate if you're a speaker or not. And I happened to look down at, it's a man and a woman. I happened to look, and they both got on speaker badges. And so they were saying, we're so tired. It was about 8:00 at night. And they said, we've got to go to another function at 9 at the Mob Museum. And it's like a get together cocktail party kind of thing. It's like, wow, really? We're going there too. Who are you? And it was Mr. and Mrs. Goncalves. I'd never met them in person. And there they were with us on the elevator. And, you know, Kimmy and I both had an opportunity. We literally embraced both of them and told them that we had prayed for their family and all of the families throughout this. And I had a conversation with Steve, and they talked about why they were at CrimeCon. Do you realize how resilient of a person you have to be to go to an event like CrimeCon and talk about the butchering of your child? Just let that sink in. Okay. And here's why they did it. Just like the Petitos have done, just like our dear friends from the Delphi case have done for years now. The reason they do it is they don't want these deaths to have been in vain. I can't stress that to you enough, my friends. And so with that said, they have set up a foundation. The Goncalveses have. And I'd urge each and every one of you to go visit, much like we do with Othram. But in this case, this is to help fund cases where there is DNA evidence that needs to be processed, and folks might not have the means. And this has just gotten into their hearts and their minds that this is what they want to do in order to honor their child. And here's how you do it. All you got to do, and I'll repeat this a couple of times. The name of the website is called murderhasaname.com. Again, murderhasaname.com. Friends, please, if you have a heart for trying to help people that are in similar circumstances to what the Goncalveses and these other families were in, just take time to go visit. Maybe, again, you can push a few bucks their way to any of these cases that, you know, that they have listed here, and means, you know, to do that sort of thing. If you have the means, give them a hand. I know Kimmy and I are going to give a hand. I've not been asked to do this on any level. It's just, I have talked about these cases for so long now, and having met them in the flesh and spoken with them, I think that it's something worthy that we could all put our shoulder to the collective stone on and push, because we are sick and tired of having monsters on our streets and living among us, getting to live full lives while others sit around and grieve and never have answers and have a lost hope. So that's murderhasaname.com. God bless each and every one of you. And I hope these families do, in fact, find peace. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.